This is a Qasid podcast production. My name is Sam Ross. This is episode number 4. Assalamu alaikum wa marhaban ya mustami'ina al-kiram. Welcome back, dear listeners. Today is Sunday, which is Al-Kitab day for our daily Qasid podcast. So we're going to be doing our best to help you make sense of some of the trickiest and most commonly misunderstood topics in Al-Kitab. Today's topic is the Masdar, which you'll find discussed on page 89 of the second edition. Our teachers report that students often find this topic very confusing, and there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One is that it's often explained by teachers using a dizzying array of English grammar that many of us haven't studied in a long, long time. That means words like infinitive and verbal noun and gerund. And if we're honest, Al-Kitab also uses some pretty vague phrases. And then there's the fact that Arabic and English have different intrinsic grammars, and sometimes we end up forcing one, i.e. Arabic, into the straitjacket of the other for explanation, i.e. English, and it can add an unnecessary degree of confusion. So let's try to tidy all this up. If you take a look at the top of page 89, you'll see the phrase al-Masdar. Notice something that unfortunately the Sad has lost its sukoon. But just to clarify, it's pronounced Masdar, and in so doing, it's pronounced like many other four-letter words you know that begin with the letter Mim. For example, there's Matbakh, a kitchen, Mat'am, a restaurant, Makhbaz, a bakery, and Masdar. Let's get started. Al-Kitab begins by asking you to review the meanings of the words safar and husul. And these two words mean, in the case of safar, either to travel or traveling, and in the case of al-husul ala, to obtain or obtaining. Let's keep going. Al-Kitab says, formally, these words are nouns that are closely related to verbs, and often function as infinitive verbs. Well, that's a bit unclear, I think, for most students. Let's unpack that a bit. The first thing Al-Kitab says is that the Masdar is a noun. What exactly does that mean? Well, it means that in the end of the day, it's not a particle. It's not like min or ila or bi, and it's not a verb. Now that can be a bit confusing because it's associated with the verb. Safar, for example, is the Masdar for the verb safara with an alif, and husul is the Masdar of the verb hasala. But safar is different from safara, the verb. So what exactly is the difference? Well, the difference is that you can do things with a masdar that you can't do with a verb. For example, you can make masdar the subject of a sentence, which you can only do with nouns. For example, I can say, al-safar jameel, traveling is beautiful. And I can only say that kind of thing, I can only make a noun into a subject. It would be silly to make a verb into a subject. It wouldn't make any sense, for example, to say, safartu jameel, I traveled, beautiful. That's quite silly. Similarly, you can make a masdar into an object, which is something only nouns can do. I can say, uhibbu as-safar, I love traveling. And only nouns can be objects. I can't say, for example, uhibbu safartu, I traveled. So inshallah, that's a little bit clearer for us. The masdar is a noun, in that it can be a subject of a sentence or the object of a sentence. Now the next thing to unpack is the phrase from Al-Kitab that they function as infinitive verbs. What does that mean? Well, by infinitive, Al-Kitab seems to mean the form of the verb where we add the word to in front. For example, safar as an infinitive in English would be translated as to travel, and al-husul as to obtain. But then Al-Kitab adds that it can also be used for the quote-unquote abstract concept of the action. The abstract concept of the action. That's quite vague. In fact, it's a rather abstract definition. Here's what Al-Kitab means. It simply means that sometimes the masdar can be translated by adding ing. And so, for example, a safar could be to travel, as we saw in the case of the infinitive, but in the abstract concept of the action, it would be traveling. And similarly, al-husul would be obtaining. So let's put it all together. In short, what we're saying is the masdar can always be translated as to plus the verb or the ing form. That's a much simpler way to think about it. Take a look at the bottom of the page of 89. There's a nice set of boxes there. We can apply what we just learned. Look down at the bottom right-hand column. You'll see yadhabu ila under the fi'l, that's the verb, he goes to. And then the masdar, al-dhahab ila. This can be translated by our previous rule as either to go to or going to. Similarly, underneath, yahfaz, which means to memorize, has a masdar of hifz. And hifz can be translated as to memorize or memorizing. let's go back to the second paragraph. Here Al-Kitab says that each verb has its own masdar. Let's unpack that a little. Every verb has a verbal noun. Every verb has a masdar. You can always say to plus the verb or add an ing, whether in English or in Arabic. And I challenge you to find a verb where you can't do this. Think of any verb in English and see if you can say ing, and it always sounds fine. Something simple like sleep, sleeping, no problem. Think of the strangest verb you can think of. The strange verb that pops into my mind right now is the verb percolate, if you like coffee. And I can say percolating or to percolate, no problem whatsoever. Also in the second paragraph, Al-Kitab alludes to what it calls a common syllabic structure. That sounds quite grandiose. A simpler way might simply be to say that some masdars rhyme with each other. They have a common voweling pattern. And so, for example, look at the bottom there. On the second column from the right, under masdar, the third masdar down is ad-dirasa. And ad-dirasa either means to study or studying. So take a moment and see if you can find a masdar that rhymes with ad-dirasa in that same column. You didn't have to look very far. Al-Kitaba just below means to write or writing, and Al-Qira'a below that means to read or reading. Notice they all sound the same, they rhyme with each other, and I'll read them for you. Ad-dirasa, Al-Kitaba, Al-Qira'a. Take a moment, see if you can find some other masdars in the second column from the right or the fourth column from the right that rhyme with each other. If you look carefully, you noticed a couple. Just below Qira'ah there's ash-shu'ur, and below that al-husul. Those rhyme with each other. Shu'ur, husul. And below them, al-amal and as-sakin, both rhyme with each other. Al-amal, as-sakin. And even as-sakin rhymes with as-safar. So we have al-amal, as-sakin, as-safar. The very final thing to look at today is the footnote on the very bottom of page 89. It's actually a great idea. It's a very useful insight, and Al-Kitab should be thanked for pointing it out. But unfortunately, it's maybe not the clearest explanation. Basically, what this footnote is getting at is that in English, we use words ending in ing for two purposes, which are translated differently in Arabic. One usage of the ing suffix is the fi'l mudara, i.e. we intend a present tense verb. We say, ana usafiru, meaning I am traveling. And here we mean I, the speaker, am traveling, the verbal sense, right now. The second ing form is the masdar, as we covered earlier. And so, for example, if we said, as-safar jameel, traveling is beautiful, we're not necessarily implying it by a particular person or in a particular tense. We mean traveling by all people in all times and places is beautiful. So two different meanings, a masdari sense and a fi'l mudari sense. So how do you know how to translate your ing verb into Arabic? You spoke in English and you said, for example, sleeping. What's the best way to translate it? It's not that hard, actually. Basically, you have to ask yourself, is there a doer? Verbs in both languages have doers. That's a giveaway of a verb, and masdars don't. So, for example, if you said, I am sleeping, you say to yourself, well, do I know who did the sleeping? And you say, well, yeah, I do. I am. I, the speaker, am sleeping right now. Therefore, we use the fi'l mudara in Arabic, and we say, ana anam. By contrast, if you said, sleeping is beneficial, in that case, who did the sleeping? We don't know. There is no doer specified. Sleeping is beneficial for most human beings and even animals. So we would say, therefore, it's not really a verbal sense, it's actually a masdari sense. So you would use the masdar, an-nawm, and you would say, an-nawm mufid. Well, speaking of mufid, we hope this has been mufid. We hope this has been helpful. If you have any specific questions about topics in Al-Kitab, please contact us via our website, www.qasid.com, or via email at questions@qasid.com. Until next time, this has been a Qasid Podcast production. My name is Sam Ross. Ma'assalam.